Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Chrysler. Each episode, we talk to business leaders and subject matter experts to learn about the challenges they've overcome and the challenges they still face. You'll hear fresh insights, real talk, and get inspiration to grow your business. Hey everybody, I am so excited to be welcoming Sneha Kumari to the podcast today. Sneha has a long history and a vast amount of experience in supply chain and operations, and so excited to be bringing her on the show today, talking about Kaizen, continuous improvement, how we get people involved, what that is like. And Sneha, thanks for coming on to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be nerding out on topics that we both connect with a lot. So definitely looking forward to this conversation. I mean, I don't know if 30 minutes or a set time is enough for us to talk about lean. That's something that you have been talking about every day, every single day. Share your content. So I think that's not enough, but let's try and keep it.
Yes, there is no real limit on this. We could go on for hours. That we could have definitely a continuous improvement teleconference marathon for this topic. And I think one of the things I think about when any of these kind of in general conversations come up is that there's a lot of terminology that I think often confuses people. It gets used interchangeably. And so maybe we could start there. I threw out the word Kaizen, maybe talk just a little bit about that history, kind of where it comes and how you see that fit into your experience, what you've seen, kind of, hands-on stuff, because I think that gets confusing for people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's start with the word like Kaizen. And I mean, if you come from, if our audience is coming from manufacturing, it might not be a new word. But for anyone who hasn't heard it, I'll still say it's made of two words, two Japanese words, kai, which means change, and zen is for better. So change for better. That's the literal word. That's the keyword. That's what Kaizen stands for. And usually very often used in manufacturing, specifically any manufacturing companies, huge followers of TPI, like the Toyota production management systems. They use Kaizens a lot to eliminate waste in their whole manufacturing processes. What I do want to highlight is, it can be, you can understand Kaizen as simple as any process that exists, existing in your existing business unit, or it could be dispersed across the teams, across the world, and you can still bring in these principles and still use it and see improvements from the current state to the future state. Your productivity, your ROI, whatever you're going after, you could just track it, see what your goal is, keeping that goal in mind. And there's a method, there's a whole principle that I have used in my past lives, and it's always been beneficial. Now, to say that we go from version 0 to version 1, do you think you will have Kaizen is this whatever 1 week, 2 week, whatever process you follow, and you will be you'll be in perfect state? No, that's why it's called continuous improvement. So you go from V0 to V1 and you see an improvement or close to the goal that you would like to, but there's this is a process. This is a journey that you have to be on, and a mindset that you need to cultivate, not just in the leadership or the sponsors, whoever is, or the business improvement managers, but also to your employee group. This is a mindset that needs to be cultivated, a mindset for changing, but changing for the better, and making sure that the adoption of this new state doesn't go away after you pull yourself out of this state. That in my head is a successful Kaizen executed and sustained. And the principles and the tools of Kaizen can be used and implemented by any team, as I said, globally, to achieve whatever results you're looking for. And one thing a misconception that I often come across is, okay, it's Kaizen, it's lean manufacturing, so we're talking about operations and production and shop floor. But wait a minute, that's not true. Kaizens could be done across the board, across your business with any team that you're involved in. It could be engineering, it could be sales. We've done marketing, new product development. So you have all these different varied form of Kaizen that you could just use the principles, use the basic principles, and then apply it in different processes and see the benefits for yourself, right? If like hiring, you could use this in hiring processes too. So that's why it's important that every department and in your organization, if that's where you want to go, should have this lean mindset, should be aware of what really this means and what are the benefits, what's in it for them, and excel and actually promote the events in their organization, bring the cross-functional team together, and see the magic for yourselves. It can eliminate your run-in operations, whatever tasks you are working on. It could be as simple as just a simple process mapping, or as big as a value stream mapping, meaning you're just looking at your entire value stream. So there's so many facets. Sorry, I just spoke for a long, but that's how I feel.
That's what happens when you get rolling on this stuff. I mean, it's, people ask me like, how could you get so excited about these things? And I think, just your answer kind of exudes the enthusiasm, because when you see this stuff unfold and you see it, what it was for me was when you see it click with other people, that maybe, because there's kind of two different cultures, right? It's the culture of people that are experts and that have studied this stuff and really understand all of the terminology and, all of the different, aspects of it. And then there's kind of the rest of the people that are starting to gather and understand the concepts. And that for me is that's the cool part, right? Like everybody that kind of nerds out on it. Okay, well that you get that, right? Because you're, like-minded and you see these things. But for everybody else that really starts to get it and starts to see the advantages and starts to see, hey, this really does make my life easier. And, all of the different positive things that go along with it. For me, that's what it was always, like that unlock was always amazing. And so but I think like your kind of excitement captures that, because that's why this stuff is so fun. That's why as people buy in, especially from a leadership perspective, and then as it flows out onto the floor, whether that's the shop floor in operations, whether that is in customer service, it doesn't matter. To your point, all of the tools, concepts, and, growth can happen throughout the entire organization. So one of the things that I'd love to get your perspective on is, when we talk about Kaizen and we talk about this ongoing improvement mindset, when is enough, right? I think that's something that needs to be talked about, because the thought process is, well, is it ever good enough? Are we to a point where we want to just sustain what we've changed, or do we always have to continue looking for that improvement? I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yes, no. So, I mean, yes, if to just answer your question, we should always be looking for continuous improvement initiatives. But as I said before, that you cannot expect a miracle to happen out of Kaizen. The improvements happens in increments, also because that's reasonable, right? You bring a cross-functional team together and you say are aiming for 10% improvement in your customer delivery objective, right? How are we going to get there? Right? You do some pre-work. I always recommend doing some pre-work before a Kaizen, so you understand where you are at today, right? Again, that's also not an easy process. We could get that. We could get into that also at some time, because process map. It's not just okay. I place an order and then XYZ does this, and then the order is placed. But what we do not capture is how much back and forth happened in between. That's a real process map. That's what we should be looking at. But anyways, digressing from that topic, so now you're looking at 10%, you understand what your current state looks like, where your bursts are, i.e. where your wastes are, and then you actually do the effort versus impact matrix. Go over there and look at the low-hanging fruits, ones that you could say, I have led 1 week Kaizens, like Kaizens that are 1 week, within 1 week. So we are doing our facilitation and, training in the first day and doing some process mapping and then objectives and where we are at. So there's a full curve of what you can achieve in, 5 days. And then there are some sustainment and controlling processes that you need to do after. So you've done some pre-work, you identify the worst, you identify your low-hanging fruits, and based on, whatever your ranking is, and then go after those that you could literally, that is tangible, that you could show, like when you actually report out at the end of the Kaizen to your leadership, you show that, okay, this was done, this training was done, this is how we have done Pokayoki / mistake proofing, and this is done. But these are the parking lot items that we should be taking probably in other Kaizens. So you will identify items that will need more Kaizens or maybe just do it events, right? So you cannot, that's why I said, like, let's be realistic with our expectations. It's, say, for example, if you do a week-long Kaizen, just do some pre-work. It's always good. Whoever is leading, who is the leader and facilitator should do some pre-work, bring the cross-functional team and understand where we are at, and have some goals already, have your vision. And super critical that we have some rules of how the event, maintains. So you're not going back to your day-to-day. And there is someone who is really taking care of it. So you're focused, so you can achieve some tangible results, right? So you want to do 10%, but maybe you could achieve 3% in 5 days, but you really did it. And this is like done, but then the next 3 and whatever percent should be taken over in probably another couple months that you could go after. So that's how I would, space out and lead the Kaizens. Just, overall your question, when is enough? Well, if we don't constantly be looking out for improvements, then we are not really growing, because say 1 year from now, things are changing so rapidly. You might need an automation tool, who knows, right? You might need to change the whole software that you are currently using. So those are the things that you need to constantly be looking at and capturing ideas. Sometimes, our employees working in your team, if you go to Gemba and if you do some KPI standards, you could get some great ideas from them on how we should constantly be improving even our sustaining operations, not just for, new product developments.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think often when I hear kind of that question around like, well, when's enough? Should we continue to be looking for things? I think more times than not, it is people that maybe haven't fully bought in to the real work behind, all the things that we're talking about. It's people that are maybe looking at an initiative, maybe looking at kind of that, I don't want to say quick wins, because, we should be seeking those things, but, maybe that short-term perspective more so than, kind of the journey that is really required, when you start to go down this path. So those are the things I kind of think about, is oftentimes it seems that maybe we're not fully bought into the, to the real meaning behind what we're embarking on and the journey that it takes. Talk a little bit too, because I brought it up unintentionally, but, you talked about kind of those week-long Kaizens and, maybe setting out with a target of having a 10% improvement, but, the reality of it is, a 3% improvement or something like that. But, talk about, from your experience, the power and the momentum behind those quick wins, those quick events that then lead to, the kind of low barrier to entry, low cost ideas to implement and test that ultimately, yield some result, right? Maybe not the expected result, but it starts to move the needle. What's that do from a culture perspective, from like just kind of continuing to snowball? What's your experience been with that?
Oh, this, great. Like, seriously, that's why also like a huge advocate of involving your team members, like people who do it, the doers of your process. Like, don't make this an executive thing unless you absolutely need to. Like, there are other processes also like that needs to be an executive level, but like have the doers in the room, like give them a break from their normal day-to-day monotonous process, bring them in, and you will see a flurry of ideas flowing through. And when I say bring them in, don't send them back for a 5-minute urgency that needed to be taken care of. Like, bring them in, focus on the vision. And it's the role of a facilitator to keep the team engrossed and involved all the time in the event. But then bringing them in not only gives you the flurry of ideas or waste, like I actually have to go take this paper manually to the shipping team and get it signed and then bring it back and then put it on my box and then again move to logistics. Like, it could be as annoying as that, but you wouldn't know that if you were doing it yourself and you are not the doer. So that's why I bring them in, and also get them it gets them excited that their opinions are valued, their inputs are taken care of. They are also the leaders of that process. So giving them that ownership and bringing them in the process gets them excited. That's what I've seen. Like, I was just running this TPI Kaizen where we were actually improving the simple buy, like, demand planning process, right? But then bringing the planners and demand planners and supply planners in the room, the buyers also, as an example, if that was supposed to be just from a mid-management scale, a 10 post-it current state mapping, that actually in no time became a 50 post-its current state mapping. So you can understand the difference because of the back and forth that were highlighted because they were in. But what the good thing that I got from that, they got a break from what they were doing every day. That was a good thing. Then they got to see especially the people, for them, the ones that were having the first Kaizen experience. They were excited about what this is and how they could use it. Oh, there is the leadership is excited about automation. They care about our work. They want us to also upskill, right? Learn new stuff while, some redundant processes could be automated. So these are small steps that we take to change the mindset, right? And get people excited about lean. Instead of throwing it doing this myself and then asking them and just training them, it's not going to work. We also need to make sure that we get the message across, like what's in it for them, why is company doing it, and how their KPIs and company's KPIs are aligned, and how this is strategic to the business. So everything they do it's not just about the tactical day-to-day. It is strategically aligned to what the business goals are. That helps you improve the culture. That helps you bring the people together, embrace their pain points, and actually invest in improving them. And slowly, when you start doing this, spreading this across all the teams, you suddenly will start seeing that change. It's not easy. It's not going to happen in a month or 6 months. It takes time, but you need to start somewhere. That's what I feel like a lot of concerns come from, it's not happening, or we're not seeing, I implemented this process but I don't see adoption. Okay, what did we, let's go back, let's do a retrospective. What happened? Did you have your targets to improve? Did you have a monitoring, someone leading the KPIs, doing Gemba walks, capturing those metrics? And when you were falling down below the goal, did we do something about it? You can't just implement a process and just get out of it and move on to something else. Sustainment is key. Audit, always audit. And that should be a never-ending process. Otherwise, you never know whether your process improvement was successful and whether or not bringing those many people in that same room really made a change.
Yeah. I love that. And, the kind of to your last point in terms of auditing, it's probably one of the places that I see most organizations over the course of time end up failing because, it's something easy to sustain in the short term. But over the course of time, that often goes kind of by the wayside. It's just one more resource to throw at, we've got to monitor and go out there and seek to inspect. And it's one of the places that can ultimately make or break the long-term sustainability of any type of change initiative. So since we're kind of on this topic, I'd love to hear about, from your experience, what are some of the kind of common challenges that you see from maybe the culture piece and how to bring folks together? Because, oftentimes, again, I think as you're having these conversations, you've got obviously two sides of the story, right? You've got that leadership perspective, and depending on where the initiatives are starting and where the mindset and the acceptance is, And same thing on the doers, the people doing the heavy lifting, right? So talk about, from your experience, kind of some of those challenges, how to maybe mitigate and bring folks together for that common goal, how to really tap in and get people working together to kind of see both sides, to ultimately be able to get to a point where you are, not just gathering those ideas, but implementing them, seeing the results of that collaborative effort.
Yeah. If I had to just name one challenge of this process, it would be change management. Like, clearly, by far, like, that's the biggest challenge, and I think that it Kaizen or not, that's the biggest challenge in any organization. Like, how do you manage change and constantly evolve? And change is hard for all of us, even like personally. It's, you
Yeah.
take time. It takes time, but you need to give it time and get used to it and keep doing it again and again. Even when we are trying to build a new habit, we need to, they say, like, I was reading some theories that you need to repeat that habit for 21 days, like resist your will to not do it one day, and just do it for 20 minutes. Suddenly you start seeing the need of it and you want to do it. That's how, like, that comes with any change. um I I want to, like, break this question into like few things, like go over, like, it's not just in terms of a Kaizen, but day to day, how leaders can get this going and inculcate this culture. So let's start with, for example, again, going back to operation supply chain, because that's where I come from. Uh, go, go to Gemba. Like, always, as I always say, you always talk about it on your posts. Go to Gemba. Like, don't sit in, like, behind the four walls and
Yep.
try to manage Excel spreadsheets or ERPs or no, go to Gemba. Go see what's happening. Go see, okay, like, take interest on how people are doing their work. One thing that I used to do was, it was like back then a concept of servant leadership, wherein we do a quick 10-minute walkthrough at different, say, different roles. So for example, sometimes it was like on the production floor, sometimes it could be the buying team, or somewhere else, and like, or with the strategic procurement team. Like, we'll go there, we'll do a quick every week, and we change the teams every day of the week, and we just go there 15 minutes, we talk to the team, and what we leave with it at, hey, you are the boss, you tell us what you need to get done to improve your pain point right now in how you are actually, say, for example, welding this. Like, this welding operations has been taking, it's a current operation, it's taking you a long time. You tell us what you need me to do to get this done. And when that Gemba walk had someone as big as our VP operations involved, like, and it's hard, I understand, like, if you're a global VP operations, you cannot go to Gemba like every day, but middle managers or managers could just go there, take notes, and make sure that that's followed through. If you can't have your senior leadership part of that, although I always recommend that wherever you are, try to go and talk to people and see what the numbers are looking like. So what that did was, something as simple as, the associates would come back and say, hey, you know what? If you could help me with this equipment, and if this tooling can be changed to do this, I have seen this. Like, they would actually come back and tell you, I used to work there and they use a different tooling, and can you just change that? And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's explore this. So now suddenly you have you make sure that they are the owners. So I am not telling them what to do. They tell me what to do, and I have to make sure that I get it done. And then just don't just leave. Like, have a chart there, like, have some kind of visual management wherein you're tracking this. He's excited that, hey, this was my idea, and do some kind of accolades, like, keep them engaged. It'll be great if it's monetary, because that excites everyone. But even if not, having, even if in your all hands, if you're able to recognize people for their ideas and how much improvement they made, I guarantee you will have these people coming back to you and telling you about 1,000 ideas that can change your process. And trust me, if it comes from them and they are the doers, they'll be the first one. They will be your ambassadors when you are not around. They will come back and they will do it, and they will make sure that everyone else around them does it. make them your ambassadors. That's your go to market. That's how you manage change, especially at these levels. If you involve your doers, the ideas come from them, you make it happen. You will see your culture changing slowly but surely. Like, that's something
Yeah.
I can guarantee you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, it's one of the kind of most favorite things to see is that shift from, the change resistor to the change champion when they recognize, how valuable their input is because they've got, and you have to think about it right from that leadership perspective. Oftentimes it's again, you kind of go back to the two sides and, you'll hear things like, oh, well, this group or these guys and girls, they don't want to participate. They don't want to, give us ideas. And then you'll talk to the folks out on the shop floor or, the people doing the lifting. And it's like, well, those guys, those girls in leadership, they never listen to us. Right. And as I always say, somewhere in the middle of that, right, there is truth. And so again, I go back to this thought process of how do you get those quick wins? Look for those low lift ideas that are going to bring some sort of improvement. Even if it doesn't, it still shows that you're listening to your team, that you're willing to try things that are, low cost, low kind of barrier to entry, and just let's experiment, let's see. And maybe you're going to be surprised with, the input and the insight and what this idea may generate for, a slight modification through somebody else's experience and input. And again, it's that collective brain power that we need to tap into. And, we need to get, more people in those change champion spots. So kind of one more question around something that I think comes up often. What's your kind of go-to way in terms of prioritizing? If we looked at kind of and said, boy, there's so many opportunities across an organization, what are some of the ways you like to think about from a prioritization standpoint of where do we put those resources? How do we get those quick wins? Is it by kind of culture and acceptance and saying like, well, this group of people seems like they're really open to change. Let's start there, where maybe the business use case isn't as significant. What do you like to do when you're faced with something like that, Sneha?
So, again, let's just take an example. I did my process mapping, whatever, or value stream mapping, or, whatever process mapping you did, and you identified your wastes, your bursts in the process, and then you documented that. And when I say wastes, there could be all like we talk about 8, 9, or like those, the wastes that we see in the process. We look at all of that. And what's important to understand is what's value add. Like, I'm sure all of us are aware of what's value add and what's non-value added process, right? Value add is anything that your customers is willing to pay for, and non-value added are, non-essential steps. But that doesn't mean that you are not going to address that, because remember, you have internal customers as well, right? So that is also important, like important bucket to look at. So what a lot of focus that I see in the industries are like, okay, it's not going to be paid by our customers, so we probably don't need to look at it, especially transactional processes. But that's wrong, because your internal employees, and if for example, if I'm a buyer and I have an ops supervisor to give plan orders for, like, we have internal customers that we are accountable for. So let's not forget that. And
Yeah.
there is, as I say, like, effort versus impact matrix has always helped me in ranking like what's important. Like, I came up with like 20 waste opportunities, but I'm not going to go address all of them. It should make sense to the business. Plus also like so that effort piece actually gives you an idea of how much of a lift it is from a change management standpoint, right? Like, for example, if you're going to go install cobots, like collaborative robots on your machine in the shop floor, you need to really think about like, where do you want to start? Like, what are those? You cannot expect an immediate change, an immediate shift. You need to think about a prototype. You need to take small steps, baby steps to get there, to manage that change. But that effort piece captures that change management and also how long it will take to implement that solution. So that helps me. But in general, like value, non-value add, what's necessary, like, something that you can eliminate immediately with some automation and you could see some tangible results within that Kaizen, you should always focus on that, because quick wins are always a good confidence booster, an
Yeah.
immediate feeling that we achieved something. So that feeling really stays and motivates you to go to the next step. Like, okay, I did make this change and people are using it. That quick win really keeps people going. So these are like two matrices that I have to always keep in mind, map it out before I decide which options to take in within that week-long Kaizen, or if you're doing a one-day JDI event. So which ones do you really focus on and fix it before you move on to the next steps?
Yeah, that's great. I love that you brought up too on the internal customers, because often that can be something that is an afterthought or not a thought at all. And, there is reality to that. I'm sure you've been in many organizations where you'll see maybe one department, one part of a process kind of be responsible for a significant amount of maybe information transfer or, something like that. And again, it gets back to how is that impacting, your customer? What are you receiving, right, as the customer from the department prior to? So I think that's a really good thing to be mindful of as we think through this. So believe it or not, 30 minutes down already. So I'll go ahead.
I have to share one final example before we go so people can relate to this. So I'll give you something as simple as, like, I'm in a production cell, right? And one problem is, for example, if there are some design changes to your engineering drawing, you need to go back and forth and probably run with your work order and change it, right? Something as simple as is if you have a digital way to project it within your work environment, do it. And that was a quick win. And now they didn't have to go back and forth, because remember, that also impacts your cycle time. If you are like going back and forth and if you're delayed in changes, again, customer orders. So anyways, what I wanted to like highlight was there's small things that can make, and again, this was your internal process. It's important that you come back and look at it. And if you can change it within that week, go ahead, do it. The quick wins keeps people motivating. But yes, 20 minutes, I'm still not done. I could have.
Well, but before we kick things off, I'll just throw it back to you and ask if there's kind of any final thoughts. I know it went really fast. I'd love to have you back on and continue the conversation, but any final thoughts, anything to kind of close things out, at least for this conversation, for the folks that are out there?
Yes, absolutely. Just some parting thoughts, like, again, as I said in the beginning, like, Kaizen can span multiple teams and facets of the business. So do not, Kaizen is not just limited to operations, supply chain, manufacturing. Go ahead, use it. You go ahead, marketing team, go ahead, sales team, customer service, use it. And change management is the biggest part that you will need to manage. And that would require unwavering leadership support and making sure that we constantly think about what's in it for me questions for the teams involved in it. Involve your doers, see that ROI come through, and make sure you audit. Do not leave a Kaizen event without having an audit process, without having an owner of that audit process in place. Those are my parting thoughts.
I love it. Well, Sneha, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been a real pleasure, and appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge and insights with our listeners.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.
Thank you so much for listening today. If we brought you any value, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Also, be sure to connect with us on social media by searching @The Crysler Club. Until next week, I'm your host, Dave Crysler.